What you have just clicked on is not just a video, but a manual to outsmart the world itself in every possible way. Over the next 2 hours, you will unlearn everything they taught you about power, control, and human behavior. Because what they taught you was designed to keep you predictable, emotional, and easy to use. Machiavelli didn't write for the average man. He wrote for the few willing to outthink the many. And if you listen even half of what's in here, you'll never see this world the same way again. No more explaining, no more being nice, no more playing fair while they play solely to win. You're about to learn how to read minds without guessing, how to pull strings without being seen, and how to become so unshakable, so calculated, they'll be scared to even look at you. This is the psychology of power, pure, cold, relentless, and it starts now. In the world you're living in, influence is currency. But most people don't even know what they're spending. They lose control by trying to gain attention. They try to persuade and become forgettable. They try to dominate and end up ignored. Because modern power doesn't look like shouting. It looks like silence at the perfect moment. It looks like someone who never posts yet controls what everyone else does. And while you're reacting, chasing, trying to be seen, someone else is bending reality without ever touching it. These people don't play the game. They design it. They don't beg for influence. They manipulate its mechanics. This is not intuition. It's doctrine. Tactics that have existed for centuries, written, sharpened, and practiced by one of history's coldest minds. Not to inspire, to dominate. His name, Machiavelli. And if he lived today, he wouldn't be arguing online. He wouldn't be giving TED Talks or selling frameworks. He'd be invisible, unseen, untouchable. But he'd control everything through whispers, through rhythms, through behavior no one could trace back to him. These are the psychological tactics Machiavelli would use today to manipulate anyone, no matter their power, status, or defense. This isn't theory. This is the architecture of influence. Machiavelli understood that the biggest mistake weak people make is trying to change behavior directly. He would first infect their mind because if you enter their mind, everything else follows. He'd implant a thought early, then disappear. A statement like, "You ever notice how people who act fast usually aren't afraid?" isn't advice, it's a seed. Now, every time they hesitate, they remember and act accordingly, not because you told them, but because the idea feels like their own. This implies identity. You don't convince people to do things, you make them believe they already would. He would also disarm with warmth to influence with precision, knowing people are suspicious of coldness. So he'd wear charm like a disguise. Today he'd smile in meetings, compliment his rivals, laugh at the right moment, nodding often. But none of it would be real. It's strategy. Because once you're perceived as safe, people relax. They speak more, share more, trust more. And that's when you move in, dropping a single sentence that reshapes the conversation. A subtle nudge that recalibrates their focus. A question that feels harmless but anchors your control. Modern manipulation isn't aggressive. It's surgical, precise, disguised as friendliness. While everyone else tries to dominate by force, Machiavelli would dominate through comfort and strike beneath it. He would build predictability, then break it because people only fear what they can't predict, and fear is the most honest form of respect. So you start by being consistent, available, clear, reliable, friendly. You lull them. Then one day you change. A late reply, a short sentence, a colder tone, no reason, and suddenly they panic. Not because you did something wrong, but because you've become unfamiliar. That gap between who they thought you were and who you're becoming is where your control starts to bloom. They'll lean in, try harder, wonder what happened, try to win back the version of you that never existed. Machiavelli didn't strike with force. He created emotional imbalance and let the victim try to repair it. Furthermore, he would make himself necessary, then scarce. People are addicted to reliability, so give them what no one else can. Solve a problem no one else sees. Offer clarity when others are confused. Make them feel safe when the world feels chaotic. Then withdraw, not with cruelty, but with elegance. Now when you're gone, they feel the absence, not because they need you, but because they got used to you. And dependence doesn't feel like weakness until you're alone with it. The power move is never to demand attention. It's to create a gap, then become the only person who knows how to fill it. Machiavelli wouldn't offer comfort for free. He'd offer it with timing. And once they lean on him, he'd step back just far enough to leave them off balance. He would say one thing that rewrites their identity, as most people don't know who they are. They live off mirrors, becoming what others reflect back at them. Machiavelli would reflect something strategic. You're dangerous when you stop second-guessing yourself. You're smarter than you let people believe. You don't need to explain yourself anymore. Say these lines once, then shut up. They'll think about them for days, weeks, years, because you didn't give them advice. You gave them a lens to see themselves through, a lens that flatters them, challenges them, shapes them. Now, whenever they rise, they think of you, and whenever they fall, they crave your reflection again. That's not influence, that's branding their soul. Another method involves blurring intention so they fill in the gaps. For certainty is safety, but confusion is power. Machiavelli wouldn't tell people what he wants. He'd let them guess. One day he's supportive, the next distant. One moment warm, the next unreadable. Not because he's unstable, but because they need something to chase. And the mind chases what it can't define. You don't explain your silence, don't clarify your motives. You let the ambiguity do the work. And people will write entire stories in their head trying to make sense of your inconsistency. They won't stop analyzing you until they understand you. And if you're smart, they never will. Confusion breeds obsession, and obsession becomes gravity. You don't push, you orbit, and soon they revolve around you. He would turn every interaction into an emotional imprint. Unlike the average manipulator who focuses on facts, Machiavelli would focus on feeling, because people forget details, timelines, who said what, but they never forget how you made them feel. That's your leverage. If you want to manipulate someone, don't try to prove a point. Make them feel understood, seen, powerful, even if they're not. Then leave. Now, the next time they feel misunderstood, ignored, or small, they'll think of you not because you were kind, but because you were unique. Most people make noise. You made imprint, and people return to whatever gave them the strongest feeling. Even if that feeling was built on illusion, he'd mirror their darkness before offering light, knowing people trust what they see of themselves in you, not the version they show the world, but the version they hide. Machiavelli wouldn't appeal to the mask. He'd speak directly to the part they're afraid of. You don't trust easily. I don't either. You don't like weakness. That's why we're alike. You've been underestimated your whole life. I see it in your silence. These statements aren't compliments, they're invitations. Now, they feel like you're not just aligned, that you're the only one who understands their shadow. This is intimacy, and once you offer intimacy, you own proximity, but you don't stay in the darkness. You lead them out of it slowly, subtly, silently. You become the solution to the part of them they hate, and people never leave what heals them, even if it hurts them in the process. He would speak in delayed echoes, while most people speak to respond. You speak to echo. Machiavelli would never try to win in real time. He'd drop a line that doesn't matter now, but will sting later. You're going to realize soon why I stayed silent. One day you'll understand what I chose not to say. I hope when it hits you, you'll remember this moment. These phrases don't resolve anything, don't correct behavior, don't teach. They haunt, because now every future mistake they make feels like you predicted it. And people obey those who feel like prophets. The less you say, the more it echoes later. You don't speak to change the moment, you speak to own the next one. He would collapse their defenses with false safety. Machiavelli wouldn't force his way past defenses. He'd convince you there was no threat. So you ask questions calmly, never raise your voice, agree more than you push back. You make them feel brilliant, validated, in control. You let them think they're the leader. And while they're feeling secure, you guide them ever so slightly where you want them to go. Then when they arrive, when they realize you've been shaping the path the whole time, they don't feel tricked. They feel grateful because you protected their ego. People follow more willingly when they think they're leading. You don't need the credit. You want the compliance. And Machiavelli never asked for recognition. He made himself essential in the background of every decision. Finally, he would end with incompleteness. Everyone's addicted to closure. They want the ending, the conclusion, the certainty. So don't give it to them. Machiavelli would leave conversations unresolved, messages unanswered, moments unwrapped. Why? Because people return to unfinished stories. They circle back to silence, analyze pauses, chase interpretation. You might say, there's more I could say, but I won't. Or, I'll let you figure it out. Or, This isn't the time, but it will make sense soon. And just like that, they lean in. That leaning is power. You never need to pull them again. They'll follow the void you left. And what's more addictive than someone who made you feel almost complete? Someone who let you walk away without the ending, but with the obsession to find it after these tactics, after the plays. What happens next? What happens after you've infected their mind with silence? After you became the echo they can't stop chasing? You don't need to say another word, because now they speak for you, defend you, adjust for you. They orbit you not because you asked, but because you've conditioned them to need your gravity. This is what Machiavelli understood better than any strategist in history. True manipulation doesn't end with action. It ends when the victim rewires themselves around your absence. First, they feel imbalance. They can't explain it. They just feel like something is off. You used to respond faster, give more, offer more certainty. But now you don't. Not in a hostile way, but in a way that makes them question themselves, not you. They ask themselves, did I change? Did I do something wrong? Why do I feel anxious? And they don't. That's the moment they start compensating, being nicer, softer, more present, more emotional. And you just breathe, because now they're no longer responding to you, they're responding to who you used to be. That's manipulation. You don't take from them. You make them offer more voluntarily. Then identity confusion sets in. And this is where things get dangerous. Now they don't just feel confused, they start changing subtly, slowly. They mimic your tone, reflect your logic, mirror your silence. Why? Because you've positioned yourself as the standard, the reference point. They no longer act based on instinct. They act based on how you might perceive it. What would he think if I said this? She wouldn't approve of this tone. I should be more like them. They've internalized your gaze even when you're not watching. They don't call this control. They call it respect. But it's not. It's submission dressed as self-improvement. And you've said nothing. Machiavelli would be smiling. Then comes behavioral looping. Now you've created the loop. They feel a moment of disconnection. They try harder. You remain distant. They invest more. You offer just enough warmth to keep them from leaving. Then you pull away again. This doesn't cause rejection. It causes attachment. Because now they believe the problem is solvable. They just need to try harder. Say the right thing, be better. That's addiction. You've become the dealer, and they're chasing your approval like it's oxygen. As Machiavelli said, men are driven by two principal impulses, love and fear. You've engineered both. They love how you made them feel once. They fear never feeling it again. So they repeat the loop, begging in silence, pleasing through performance. And the more they give, the less you need to. This leads to emotional branding. When the control becomes permanent, they meet someone new and compare them to you. They hear a phrase and remember how you said it. They hesitate before reacting because they wonder how you would have handled it. You're not just a memory, you're a standard. Their mind has carved a space in its architecture that's shaped like you. And everything else must now pass through it. This is how emotional branding works. Not as a logo or slogan, but as a psychic fingerprint. The way you made them feel, the way you made them question themselves, the way you made them crave approval they couldn't earn. It's embedded now, and you haven't said a word. Finally, silent authority is established. You've stopped messaging, stopped guiding, you're gone. But they still behave like you're watching. They still think in your voice, speak with your rhythm, pause with your silence. They seek your approval in new people, and feel betrayed when it doesn't feel like you. You become a ghost with gravity, a shadow that shapes the day. And if they ever try to confront you, demand answers, or ask for closure, you give them nothing, just like Machiavelli would. Because true power isn't proven through presence, it's measured through influence after you've disappeared. You've infected their thoughts, rewired their reactions, branded their emotions. But influence alone is never enough for Machiavelli. He didn't just want to be followed, he wanted to be obeyed. Not through threats, not through dominance, but through a darker force, complicity, the kind that makes them betray others for your approval, lie to protect your reputation, hurt themselves to stay near you, and the brilliance. They'll think they're doing it by choice. Because the greatest form of power isn't when people admire you. It's when they fear losing the version of themselves you've allowed them to become. One way is to let them compromise for you. You want control. Don't ask for loyalty. Let them offer betrayal. You never say, tell me what they said, or keep this between us, or take my side. Instead, you say things like, I won't ask you to choose, I trust you'll do what's right. You always know how to handle these things. Now, they make the decision. They lie for you, protect you, sacrifice someone else to stay in your favor. And once they've done that, they are yours, because guilt bonds deeper than love. And once someone betrays others for your benefit, they can't risk you ever walking away. They won't want to because you know too much. But more than that, they've already invested in you, and people protect what they've compromised to keep. He would ensure he was never the one holding the knife. When it's time to cut someone off, ruin a rival, or end a relationship, you don't act. You let them do it for you. You drop questions like poison, asking, "You ever notice how he only shows up when it benefits him?" Or, "I don't know, I just get the feeling she talks about you differently when you're not around." Or even, "It's probably nothing, just be careful." Now they start watching, second-guessing, distancing. You didn't accuse anyone, didn't force a reaction, but the wedge is in. And when the relationship collapses, they don't blame you, they blame their own awareness. Meanwhile, you remain clean, untouched, respected. This is Machiavellian mastery. Do the work from the shadows, but never appear in the consequence. He would become the keeper of their secrets because the more someone tells you, the more you own. You don't ask for confession. You just listen with such poise, such calm curiosity that the truth slips out. Now you're not just someone they trust. You're the only person who holds that side of them. And as long as you hold it, you hold them not through threat, but through presence. Because even if you never bring it up, they remember what you know. And that knowledge, that silence, keeps them loyal in ways fear never could. They don't want you to use it, but they know you could. And that changes how they move around you. They speak more gently, tread more carefully, seek to stay on your good side. Because when people give you their secrets, they give you their leverage. And Machiavelli never needed to expose anyone. He simply let them remember what they revealed. He would let loyalty feel like a privilege, not a transaction. The average manipulator demands commitment. Machiavelli would never. He'd act like loyalty was a rare invitation, a privilege few receive, a connection earned, never assumed. And when people feel like they've earned something sacred, they protect it more viciously. So you reward actions subtly, perhaps with a knowing glance, a rare compliment, an inside reference only they catch. You make them feel chosen, not publicly, but privately, intimately. And once someone feels like they've been selected, they begin performing, not for validation, but for retention. They don't want to lose their seat at your table because in their mind you don't need them. You've created the ultimate psychological imbalance. They need you more than you need them, and they feel lucky just to stay close. That's not influence, that's hierarchy, and it's invisible. He would use guilt as a psychological chain. Guilt isn't always loud. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes all you do is withdraw. You don't reply to the message. Take longer to look at them. Seem a little distant. They start thinking, did I say something wrong? Did I disappoint them? Did I lose their respect? You don't need to confirm anything. The guilt will do the work. They'll over-apologize, overcompensate, change their behavior just to win back the version of you they imagine they've lost. That's the chain. They betray their boundaries to protect your perception of them. Reshape their personality for your comfort. Rehearse every word before they speak it, and they call it growth. But it's not. It's submission. Machiavelli wouldn't control people through orders. He'd let them imprison themselves, just to stay in his good graces. He would let the fear of losing you replace the need to understand you. You don't need to be understood. You need to be feared losing. You keep parts of yourself hidden. Share less than they want. Show up unpredictably. But always leave a mark. So now they stop asking questions, stop needing clarity, stop expecting answers because they've realized that trying to understand you pushes you away, and they'd rather be confused than alone. So they adjust. They become quieter, more cautious, more agreeable. They call this being safe. But really, it's learned submission. Machiavelli didn't just make people want him. He made them terrified of life without him. And that's when you know you've won. Not when they admire you, but when they shrink just to remain in your light. You've made them loyal. You've made them doubt themselves. You've conditioned their emotions. You've rewritten their identity. But there's still one final move, one no one expects. You disappear, not in rage, not in punishment, but with silence so sharp it reshapes their reality. Because true Machiavellian power doesn't rest in what you can do and present. It rests in what happens after you've left. That's how you become untouchable. Not by staying in the game, but by becoming the board. They think their minds are their own. They think they're too smart to be manipulated, too aware to be influenced, too independent to be controlled. But Machiavelli would laugh at that illusion, because real control doesn't look like force. It doesn't come from threats or violence or screaming orders. It comes from silence, from suggestion, from precision. Control in its purest form looks like choice. It makes the target believe they arrived at the idea themselves. And that's what makes it so terrifying. You don't dominate someone by overpowering them. You dominate them by understanding what they think they need. Then you feed it back to them, twisted slightly, tilted just enough to serve your aim. And by the time they realize what's happened, it's already done. This is the first principle of Machiavellian mind control. To lead people first, let them believe they are free because no one resists what they feel they chose. So Machiavelli never imposed his will directly. He guided, nudged, allowed people to choose the very path that served him. Let's say you want to control the outcome of a conversation. You don't argue, you don't demand. You ask a loaded question, one that subtly limits the other person's options to only the outcomes you've already chosen. Do you think it's smarter to act now while the opportunity's still warm, or risk waiting and having to work twice as hard later? There's no third option. They feel like they're choosing, but every path leads where you want it to. That's not manipulation, that's cognitive engineering, Machiavellian style. But to pull that off, you have to master the second rule. Control their frame before you speak your facts. Because people don't believe the most accurate voice in the room. They believe the most anchored one. The one who sounds like the authority, who frames the terms, who defines the battlefield before anyone else realizes they're even in a fight. You walk into a meeting and say, "This is the direction that makes the most strategic sense given where the industry is headed." Boom, you've defined the frame. Now, anyone who disagrees isn't just offering a different idea, they're challenging the logic of progress itself. You haven't even made your argument yet, and you've already won. That's how Machiavelli would take a room. Not by yelling, by anchoring the narrative first. And if someone tries to resist, you don't push harder. You use the third rule. Mirror their fear, then redirect it. This is psychological Aikido. You don't attack their resistance, you use it. If they fear risk, you validate the fear, then point it toward the option you want. Say you want them to accept a bold plan. You say, "I know you're hesitant." Anyone who's made the mistake of playing it too safe has felt that same hesitation. The real risk is what happens if we let this moment pass. Suddenly their fear becomes your weapon because now not choosing your plan feels like the dangerous move. This is how Machiavelli turned resistance into raw momentum. By never fighting emotion, only redirecting it. And what happens once you have emotional momentum on your side? You apply the fourth rule. Make them believe your idea was theirs. It's not enough to win an argument. You need people to defend the thing you wanted as if it was their own thought. You don't tell them what to do. You describe the problem, frame the stakes, ask leading questions, and then you pause. Let them speak. Let them discover the path you laid out. They'll say, "You know what? Actually makes sense and it'll be your plan," but now they've claimed it. And once someone claims ownership of an idea, they'll fight harder to protect it than you ever could. Machiavelli didn't want mindless followers. He wanted self-automated instruments. People who thought they were acting freely, but were really acting in alignment with his design. That's the most dangerous kind of power, control that doesn't look like control. Because when people can't see the strings, they never question who's pulling them. And yet even this isn't enough because ideas fade, emotions shift, loyalty drifts. That's why Machiavelli's fifth rule matters more than all the rest. Tie their identity to your influence. You don't just guide what people do, you shape how they see themselves while doing it. You make your followers feel wise for aligning with you. Make your supporters feel morally superior. Make your allies believe they're part of something elite. You use language like "people like us don't tolerate weakness." That's why we always act early. Only those with vision will move on this now. You're not giving them a strategy, you're giving them an identity badge. And once people adopt an identity, they'll change their behavior automatically to match it. No pressure required. This is how you make your presence permanent in someone's mind. They don't just remember what you said, they remember how they felt about themselves when they were around you. And if that feeling was powerful, certain, respected, they'll seek it again and again until your approval becomes the axis of their decision-making. That's what Machiavelli would do today. Not argue on social media, not post louder. He'd walk into rooms, lower his voice, and say almost nothing. Because when you know how to craft frames, guide emotions, plant thoughts, and rewrite identities, you don't need to control everyone. You just need to control the one who controls the rest. And by the time they realize who's really driving their mind, you've already moved on to the next room, the next mind, the next decision you never had to fight for because it was always yours to begin with. Control isn't about domination, it's about infiltration. Machiavelli never walked into a room to overpower it. He slipped into the cracks of doubt, of desire, of identity, and made himself essential without being visible. This is why his sixth rule is so lethal. Control the rhythm. Decide when things begin and when they end. Because time is not neutral. Whoever controls the timing of a conversation, a negotiation, a decision, controls the tempo of thought. You see it in subtle moves. For example, he pauses longer than expected, forcing you to speak first. He waits until you're slightly uncomfortable before delivering a key suggestion. He calls the meeting when others are reactive or tired, ensuring they'll default to whatever sounds most confident. His voice controls the rhythm, and you control the urgency, the pressure, the perception of options. People rarely choose the best idea. They choose the one that arrives at the right time. Machiavelli knew, he who acts first rarely wins. He who acts last but with poise wins everything. So, what does that look like today? You don't respond immediately. You don't rush to correct someone. You let others reveal their cards first. You watch the room. Then, when the moment dips into uncertainty, you step in with absolute clarity. That pause before you speak, that's psychological gravity. And when you control timing, your words land like law. Now, here's the seventh rule. Build silence into your presence. Most people try to dominate minds with more words, but Machiavelli understood. People don't follow those who speak the most. They follow the ones they have to interpret, the ones who are unreadable. Because what you can't fully read, you watch. And what you're watching closely starts to control you. Machiavelli would sit quietly in a room full of talking men saying nothing for 30 minutes, then ask a single loaded question. And suddenly the conversation would rotate around him. Not because he was loud, because he was precise. That's real influence. Let others reveal themselves in noise while you become dangerous in silence. If you want to control minds, you stop rushing to fill space. You create psychological space others feel pulled into. Speak slowly. Use long pauses. Let your gaze linger a moment longer than expected. Do less, but do it with surgical intensity. You don't need many words when people are already playing your voice in their heads. Now we move to the eighth rule, one of Machiavelli's most subtle. Use reputation as a decoy. People trust what seems stable. So you build an outer persona, a consistent, predictable surface. Maybe you're the thoughtful one, the calm one, the humble one. But behind that reputation, you store your moves. Because once people know who you are, they stop watching closely. That's when you strike. Machiavelli used this constantly, appearing loyal until the very moment loyalty stopped serving him. He didn't lie. He allowed people to assume, and their assumptions became a shield he operated behind. Today, you do the same. You let them label you. Then, while they're busy trusting the label, you reshape the terrain beneath them. Reputation isn't your identity. It's your camouflage. And if done correctly, it protects your real motives while they grow stronger in silence. Let's sharpen this further with rule number 9. Influence the influencer. Machiavelli didn't waste time persuading the crowd. He looked for the one person who mattered, the leader, the voice, the echo chamber's core. Then he'd build rapport subtly, calmly, respectfully. He'd make that person feel heard, empowered, seen. And when the moment came, he'd implant a thought so aligned with their ego that they'd push his agenda, thinking it was their own. This is how you move entire systems, not through the front door, but through the person who holds the keys. You find the voice others follow, you shape that voice, and the rest follow automatically. That's not charm, that's targeted leverage. Now becomes the 10th rule, disarm them with a shared weakness. This is one of Machiavelli's most devastating psychological tactics. When people see you as too perfect, they get defensive. They question your motives. They resist your presence. But when you confess a small, non-dangerous flaw, one that makes you human, they relax. You say things like, honestly, I overthink things sometimes too. Took me a while to figure that out myself. I've failed more times than I care to count. This isn't vulnerability, it's tactical humility. You're not exposing weakness. You're manufacturing relatability. And the moment someone feels you're just like them, they stop guarding their mind. They open up. They mirror your tone. They start absorbing your suggestions like they're part of a shared story. That's when you plant the seed. It won't feel like influence. It'll feel like connection. But it will spread in their behavior, their speech, their next move, until they look back and realize they've become an agent of your frame. And that's the power of Machiavelli's method. You don't push, you pull, you don't demand, you design, you don't tell them what to think. You make them believe they've never thought more clearly. And by the time they understand what's happened, you've already rewired the architecture of their mind and walked out the door like you were never there. True control doesn't feel like pressure. It feels like clarity. And that's what makes Machiavellian influence so terrifying. Because it doesn't break the mind, it shapes it until it willingly builds its own cage, and then thanks you for the design. We've entered the deepest layers now. Not the surface techniques of persuasion, but the long-game psychological architecture that allows someone to dominate another's thinking without ever raising a voice or leaving a fingerprint. Let's continue with Rule 11. Control their future by framing their past. People don't just act based on logic, they act based on narrative. They want their choices to feel consistent with their identity. And Machiavelli understood that if you reframe someone's past, you subtly lock in how they behave next. You remind them of their past actions, but you reinterpret them. You say, you've always been someone who sees through nonsense. Don't stop now. You made the brave move back then. This is just the next step. That risk you took last time, this is the same energy, just evolved. What are you doing? You're writing their storyline for them, framing their past decisions as stepping stones toward your desired outcome. This is how you override resistance. You make the choice feel like self-continuity. They believe they're just being true to who they've always been. But who defined that identity? You did. That's not suggestion, that's narrative possession. And once you own someone's story, you own their next step. Now, on to Rule 12. Perhaps the most misunderstood and misused. Reward them not with praise, but with positioning. Most people try to win loyalty by giving compliments, but compliments wear off. They're forgettable, generic, often dismissed. Machiavelli would never rely on shallow flattery. He'd reward people with roles that elevate them in their own eyes within your frame. You say, you're the only one I trust with this. You always catch what others miss. This needs your eye. You're the calmest in chaos. That's why I'm bringing this to you. You're not just praising, you're assigning identity. And once someone adopts that identity, they bind themselves to your influence. Because now their self-worth is tied to how you see them. You've made your approval their mirror. And if you ever pulled that mirror away, they'd chase to get it back. Not because they like you, but because without your frame, they feel less like themselves. That's how Machiavelli built loyalty. Not with gifts, not with money, with identity roles they didn't want to lose. Let's move into the most difficult but devastating tactic of all. Rule 13. Control minds by controlling what they fear to lose. Every mind has an anchor, a fear so deep, so hidden, that it governs every decision, even the rational ones. Machiavelli would never seek it by asking directly. He would watch closely. He'd look for subtle cues. For example, what do they defend emotionally, even when it makes no logical sense? What do they bring up repeatedly, unprompted? What kind of people do they resent or overpraise? That's how you locate the real pressure point, the unspoken fear, fear of irrelevance, fear of rejection, fear of being ordinary, fear of being exposed. Once you find that, you don't exploit it immediately. You simply position yourself as the shield against that fear. You say, what you're building here, people don't understand how rare it is, but I do. There's only a few people thinking ahead like you are. That's why we align. Most people settle, but what you're doing, that's elite behavior. Now you've placed yourself between them and their fear. Your presence feels like security. Your absence would feel like risk. And now they're tethered to you, not because of your strength, but because without you, they might have to confront something they've spent years avoiding. That's not influence. That's psychological captivity by choice. And it's the crown jewel of Machiavellian mind control. Because at that point, you don't need to persuade. You don't need to push. You don't even need to be present. They'll check themselves, correct themselves, think twice automatically before making a move that might cost them your approval. And all of it started with what seemed like a casual comment, a respectful pause, a soft validation, a subtle roll, a carefully crafted frame. That's the irony of real control. It's invisible. It doesn't feel like chains. It feels like alignment. They walk away thinking they're clear-headed, focused, more themselves than ever. They don't feel like they've been steered. They feel like they've finally found clarity. But that clarity was yours, not theirs. And by the time the realization hits, if it ever does, they're already doing your work, speaking your language, carrying out your will with pride. When control is perfect, it leaves no fingerprints. They speak your words as if they were their own. They fight for your goals while believing they're defending their values. They call it self-expression when in reality their entire worldview has been shaped, narrowed, and polished by you. This is not theory. This is Machiavellian reality. And it doesn't rely on genius, it relies on architecture. The architecture of suggestion, timing, identity, and silence. Now that you've absorbed the 13 rules, the question isn't if you can control someone's mind. It's how long can you stay invisible while doing it? Because here's the final layer, the sustainment layer where Machiavelli would turn influence into permanence. You've already planted the frame, shaped the story, and redirected the emotion. But if you stop there, it can all unravel. So now you reinforce control through 3 invisible cycles. Cycle 1, predictive conditioning. This is where you train them to anticipate your approval. You don't need to micromanage them anymore. They start checking their choices against what they believe you would think. Before speaking, they pause. Would he respect this? Before acting, they reflect. She wouldn't do it this way. You've become their inner judge, their invisible compass. Not because you commanded anything, but because you've quietly tied their self-respect to your perspective. And here's the trick. You don't reinforce this with compliments. You reinforce it with selective withdrawal, a moment of cold silence, a delayed reply, a faint change in tone, and suddenly they're scrambling, readjusting. Not because you said anything, but because they felt the shift. They miss the emotional equilibrium they used to have with you, and they'll correct themselves to earn it back. That's not manipulation. That's influence that self-perpetuates. Cycle 2, intellectual echoing. You start hearing your language in their mouth, your metaphors, your tone, your philosophy. At first, it's subtle. It's not about force. It's about leverage. The frame matters more than the facts. You don't chase power. You shape the space until it lands in your lap. These are your ideas echoed back to you. And every time they say them, they reinforce their own buy-in. It becomes a loop. They quote you. They post about your thoughts. They teach others what they learned from you. Now, they're not just a subject of your influence. They're a messenger of it. And once someone starts publicly defending your frame, they will not betray it because to do so would be to lose face. That's Machiavellian brilliance. You get people to build their reputation on your influence. Now they protect your control without even realizing they're doing it. Cycle 3, control dissonance. This is where you create just enough friction to remain necessary. You do this not by causing drama, but by remaining slightly beyond their full comprehension. You let them feel that they almost understand you, but not quite. That your next move, your next insight, your next pivot holds something just out of their reach. This creates attention, not anxiety, curiosity. And curiosity is addictive. You become the one person whose mind they want to decode, whose presence they seek when their own certainty starts to crack. You don't offer easy access. You offer rare clarity. That scarcity of full understanding keeps them orbiting your gravity. And no matter how confident they become in the outer world around you, they stay slightly tilted. It's not because you make them feel small. It's because you make them feel unfinished. And people will return endlessly to whatever makes them feel like they're becoming something more. This is how Machiavelli would never need to control someone through brute force. He'd make them addicted to his perception of them. He'd design the mental loop they can't step out of, because leaving it would mean losing their evolved identity. And that, above all, is the final Machiavellian truth. The deepest control is when your absence becomes destabilizing, when your silence speaks louder than other people's words, when your approval feels like alignment, when your distance is interpreted as a test, when your mind becomes the compass they reach for in every moment of doubt. At this level, you are no longer influencing their decisions. You are inhabiting their operating system. And whether it's a business partner, a lover, a team, a group, they won't just follow you. They'll rely on you to remain whole. They'll build strategies that align with your vision. They'll ask themselves what you would say in a room you're not even in. They'll crave your insight, not because it's loud, but because it's always a step beyond theirs. And the moment you choose to speak, to reward, to return, it will feel to them not like a favor, but like the world snapping back into order. That is how Machiavelli would control anyone's mind today, not through seduction, not through pressure, but by quietly becoming the reference point for their thinking, the unseen engine behind their freedom, and the architect of a psychological reality they never consented to but will never want to leave. They expect you to panic. They expect you to flinch first, break first, speak first. The world is structured around reactions, emotional, immediate, and uncontrolled. But what happens when you don't give them any? When you sit in the middle of chaos with an expression carved in stone and a mind as still as a frozen lake, that's not just calm. That's power. And no one understood that better than Machiavelli. Let's get one thing straight. Calmness isn't peace, it's not softness, it's a weapon. But only when you know how to use it. Most people think being calm means being passive, disengaged, or letting things slide. They confuse stillness with weakness. Machiavelli would laugh in their face because for him calm wasn't a default state. It was a deliberate tactic, a controlled silence designed to unnerve, to dominate, and most importantly to protect the self from emotional ambush. He once wrote that a man who wishes to profess goodness at all times will come to ruin among so many who are not good. In other words, if your calm is just politeness, you're done. But if your calm is built like armor, if it's your strategy, not your weakness, then you're playing on a level most people can't even see. Here's the first lesson. Never react when you're expected to. The moment someone throws bait, emotional or otherwise, they're trying to write your next move for you. And most people comply. They argue when insulted, panic when threatened, smile when praised, predictable. But Machiavelli teaches us that predictability is a leash. True power lies in controlling your reactions, not for peace but for dominance. If they can't read you, they can't plan against you. Second, use silence as a mirror. When someone speaks too much, listen more. Not to understand them emotionally, but to expose them strategically. People will fill silence with truth they didn't intend to share. They'll project their own fears, biases, and goals onto your quiet. Machiavelli would often let others speak themselves into traps. A calm face and focused eyes made people desperate to explain themselves to fill the void, and the more they spoke, the more power shifted to the one who stayed still. Third, detach from praise. This one's subtle. Praise is often used to disarm you. It softens your edge, makes you want to maintain the image they've praised. But Machiavelli would argue that external validation is one of the most dangerous addictions. The calmer you are when praised, the more unsettling it becomes. Why? Because they can't tell if you agree, disagree, or are planning something bigger. You hold your own image. You don't borrow theirs. Fourth, slow down the tempo. In moments of stress, people speed up. They talk fast, think fast, decide fast. That's where mistakes are made. The Machiavellian mind knows that urgency is often artificial, manufactured by others to force you into rushed compliance. Your calm disrupts that. It sends a message. I do not move on your timeline. And if they can't drag you into their storm, they have to sit in your stillness. That alone shifts control. Fifth, observe patterns, not words. When you're emotionally neutral, you start seeing the game for what it is. People lie with words but confess with habits. The same person who preaches loyalty disappears when you're at your lowest. The one who smiles too much at others' success might never clap for yours. Machiavellian calm allows you to watch without getting pulled into their narrative. You gather data, you track behavior, and then when it matters, you act with precision. No drama, just consequences. Sixth, accept the worst before it happens. This isn't about pessimism, it's about preparation. When you've already mentally accepted the possibility of betrayal, loss, or failure, it can't rattle you when it arrives. You move through it with eerie composure because you've already played it out in your mind. And when others see that, they feel small. You've removed their ability to shock you. That's psychological dominance. 7th, mask your ambition. Calm doesn't mean lack of desire, it means disciplined hunger. The truly dangerous man doesn't announce what he wants. He moves toward it quietly with a neutral face and unwavering steps. Machiavelli warned against appearing too eager for power. Instead, be underestimated. Let others believe you're content, passive, indifferent. Then when they lower their guard, you strike clean, cold, and without warning. 8th, build a mind that doesn't crave justice in the moment. Most people want fairness now. They want apologies now. They want to be understood now. But Machiavelli didn't believe in the morality of instant justice. He believed in outcomes. Being calm in the face of unfairness doesn't mean you're okay with it. It means you're collecting interest. Every wrong done to you becomes a silent debt. And when the time is right, you collect not with anger, but with elegance. 9th, always calculate emotional cost. Every reaction you give costs something. Your time, your energy, your image. Machiavellian calm involves budgeting your emotional currency. You don't give attention to insults that don't matter or explanations to people who aren't owed one. You protect your inner economy. And because you spend emotions wisely, you always have more to invest where it truly matters when the real game is being played. 10th, see through flattery with surgical clarity. Compliments, when timed well, are tools of manipulation. The Machiavellian sees every compliment as a potential strategy. Who's saying it? Why now? What do they want in return? Calmness gives you the space to assess without reacting. While others get drunk on praise, you sip the poison slowly, identify its taste, and spit it out before it does any real damage. 11th, use calm as a form of punishment. Silence is not just the absence of words. It's a calculated weapon. When someone betrays, insults, or disappoints you, the average person yells, cries, or tries to talk it out, but that gives the other person exactly what they want, an emotional payoff, a reaction. Instead, Machiavellian calm punishes with distance. You remove yourself completely. No closure, no emotional resolution, just emptiness. That void they're left with, it hurts more than any words could. 12th, know when to let others destroy themselves. Not every fire needs your water. Sometimes people spiral, lie, or manipulate because they expect you to jump in and fix things. But the calm strategist lets them burn, not out of cruelty, but out of control. You understand that chaos often consumes its own creators. And when you're calm, you can watch it unfold from a distance, safe, detached, untouchable. 13th, and maybe the most important one. Don't mistake emotional suppression for true calm. Machiavelli never advocated for robotic detachment. He advocated for mastery. True calm doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you feel everything. But you choose when, where, and how it's expressed. You control the temperature of your inner world like a blacksmith controls fire. Always burning, never out of control. You begin to realize that the calmer you become, the more unsettling your presence is to those who thrive on noise. They start to question your thoughts, your motives, your plans. They poke, they prod, they provoke because silence is louder than their chaos. And you just sit there watching, thinking, calculating. That's when your calm stops being just a personal skill and becomes an atmosphere. People can feel it when you enter a room. They sense that they're no longer in charge of the tempo, that their tricks don't land the same way, that their usual hooks don't catch. This is where Machiavelli's philosophy becomes less about theory and more about lived power. Because calmness, when practiced at this level, reshapes how others behave around you without you having to tell them anything. Think about how predators in nature move. The ones who run at every sound, who snap at every movement, rarely survive long, but the ones who stalk slowly, almost lazily, control the entire field. Their calm isn't laziness. It's supreme confidence. It's knowing that their next move doesn't have to be loud to be lethal. This is the kind of calm that starts bending reality in your favor. People begin to second-guess their own moves before making them. They hesitate. They self-censor. And all because you refuse to let them dictate your inner state. A powerful extension of this is how you handle confrontation. Most people approach conflict like a street fight, fast, loud, and messy. But Machiavelli would advise you to treat every confrontation like a chessboard. You don't need to swing first. You don't even need to look aggressive. All you need is to radiate a composure so cold that it unsettles their certainty. A calm opponent is terrifying because they seem to know something you don't. They seem prepared for every outcome. That's why your stillness must be rehearsed, refined, and practiced until it's second nature, so that even under pressure, your face remains an unreadable mask. Another dimension to this is emotional camouflage. You might be furious inside, but outside you remain unshaken. Not because you're suppressing your humanity, but because you're playing a longer game. You don't want them to know what you feel in the moment. You want them to discover it when it's too late, when your strategy has already unfolded. Calmness here is not absence but delay. You postpone your reaction until it serves you best. That's why people who use emotional outbursts as a weapon often fail against someone Machiavellian. They can't get a rise out of them, and without that their tactic collapses. Then there's the question of self-control under provocation. The modern world is engineered to trigger you. Notifications, headlines, insults, comparisons. Everyone is shouting. Everyone wants your attention. But if you take Machiavelli's view seriously, you understand that every attention grab is an attempted leash. If you get angry at a post, a comment, or a rumor, you're on someone else's string. Calmness severs that string. It's the quiet refusal to be recruited into someone else's war. That refusal over time makes you immune to most of the manipulation that traps ordinary people. But don't think this makes you untouchable without effort. It takes a disciplined interior life to maintain. Machiavelli's philosophy of calmness isn't a quick hack. It's a practice of constantly auditing your impulses. Every time you're about to respond, you ask, who benefits if I react right now? Sometimes the answer will be, no one but yourself. Most times, though, you'll see that reacting gives someone else power. And in that second, you learn to hold it back, to let the silence do the talking. That's when you stop playing their game and start making them play yours. There's also a subtler effect at work. When you master calmness, you force people to reveal their true priorities. Someone trying to manipulate you expects resistance. When you don't give it, they overexpose themselves. They push harder, make bigger mistakes, or show their cards too soon. Your calmness becomes a diagnostic tool. It's like holding a mirror up to them. They show you who they really are because they can't figure you out. That's how Machiavellian calm turns into intelligence gathering. You don't just stay neutral, you extract information from their frustration. And this state of composure does something even deeper inside you. It creates a mental distance from your own ego. Most of us defend our pride on impulse. We take things personally. We want to prove people wrong right away. But Machiavelli would consider that foolish. Why? Because instant defense is still reaction. It means someone else set the frame, and you stepped into it. The truly calm person doesn't defend at all. Not because they're weak, but because they know their reputation is a fortress built on action, not argument. Over time, people stop challenging what you don't bother to defend. Once you reach this level of calmness, your timing becomes lethal. You're no longer reacting to events. You're shaping them. You learn to wait until people are most vulnerable, most distracted, or most overconfident before you act. And when you do, it's decisive. This is what makes the Machiavellian approach so unnerving to others. They never see it coming because you gave them no tells. Your calm wasn't a pause. It was a setup. One of the most underestimated powers of calm is how it disorients aggressors. An angry person expects an angry reply. A loud person expects a louder comeback. When you meet aggression with poise, their script breaks. They start stumbling, doubting, recalibrating. Some will even try harder to provoke you, revealing their desperation. Others will back off completely, sensing they're outmatched. In both cases, you win without fighting. Your calm becomes a psychological chokehold, but you also have to know when to break your own stillness. That's the paradox. If you're calm all the time, people may start to believe you're incapable of strong action. So every now and then you strike fast, sharp, unexpected. This shows that your calm isn't inability, it's choice. It teaches others that your silence is dangerous, not passive. Machiavelli understood this rhythm. Stillness as default, sudden movement as message. It's the pattern that predators use in nature. Motionless until the kill. And through all of this, remember, calmness doesn't mean isolation. It doesn't mean never expressing emotion. It means you've built a space between stimulus and response so wide that you're no longer a puppet. In that space, you decide who gets access to your inner world, who deserves your reaction, and who only deserves your silence. That's not just self-control. That's sovereignty. When you practice these lessons long enough, your life starts to look different. Conversations slow down. Conflicts feel less urgent. Opportunities appear where before there was only noise. People start treating you with a strange respect, even fear. And you stop being tossed around by every gust of emotion because you've built your own center of gravity. Calm isn't something you have anymore. It's something you are. That transformation isn't obvious at first. You'll still have moments when your heart races, when your hands want to clench, when your tongue itches to respond. But something inside you knows better now. It whispers, hold, wait, watch. That voice is the product of discipline, not temperament. It's the Machiavellian calm that doesn't come naturally. It's forged, and every time you listen to it instead of the chaos, you get stronger, more impenetrable, more sovereign. You'll begin to notice how emotional people try to make you feel guilty for not reacting the way they want. They'll say you're cold, distant, uncaring. That's their manipulation disguised as morality, because when someone can't control you emotionally, their next move is often moral shaming. Machiavelli would have advised you to expect this, to see guilt not as an invitation to self-reflect, but often as a weapon wielded to bind you. And when you stay calm in the face of that accusation, you expose their dependence on your compliance. It's in these moments where you must internalize a brutal truth. You are not responsible for how others feel about your silence. Their discomfort is not your burden. Their confusion is not your cue to explain. You've already exited that game. And now every emotion you do show becomes more powerful, more meaningful because it's rare. That's the paradox of calmness. It doesn't make you less human. It makes your humanity more expensive. You'll also see how calmness in negotiation changes everything. Whether it's business, relationships, or influence, the person who's more emotionally controlled usually ends up with the better deal. Because desperation leaks, neediness screams. But calm whispers power. When you act like you can walk away at any moment without flinching, you start to control the frame. They try harder to keep you. They offer more, they lower their guard. And you're just watching the pieces shift, choosing when to press forward. That same principle applies to status. In any room, the most visibly calm person is rarely at the bottom of the hierarchy. Even if they aren't the loudest, even if they don't speak often, their presence creates gravity. They're the eye of the storm. Others unconsciously orient themselves around that stillness because it signals certainty. And certainty is rare. You don't get that by forcing it. You get it by knowing your internal world better than anyone knows theirs. This calm becomes especially potent when paired with mystery. You don't overshare. You don't explain your moves. You don't advertise your pain or your plans. People start to fill in the blanks, and their imagination often paints you bigger, stronger, more capable than you are. Machiavelli understood that ambiguity is a form of power. Let others project their fears and fantasies onto your silence while you quietly refine your next step. You also stop apologizing for the wrong things. Most people say sorry to smooth over discomfort, but discomfort is often exactly what you need. Calmness teaches you that silence can hold tension longer than words ever could, so you let people sit in their own unease. If someone crosses a line, you don't lash out or explain, you withdraw. You let your absence teach them what your presence was worth. The right people will understand. The wrong ones will accuse. Either way, you win. But you don't become cold. That's where many get this wrong. True Machiavellian calm isn't emotional frost. It's emotional control. You still feel deeply, maybe more than most. But you've trained yourself not to act impulsively. You don't trust every feeling just because it's loud. You observe your emotions like data, signals, not instructions. That's the difference between emotional intelligence and emotional slavery. And when people see you feel, but only when you choose, they realize just how far outside their control you really are. Even your relationships start to shift. The people who were drawn to your past volatility might fall away. They'll say you've changed, that you're too in your head now. Let them go. Because what's really happening is this. Your calm has made you incompatible with their chaos. They needed your reactivity to maintain the old dynamic. But now your silence terrifies them. Your composure makes them question their own behavior. That's not your burden, that's your evolution. You'll also find that calmness sharpens your memory. When you're not stuck in emotional fog, you remember exactly what people said, how they said it, what their patterns are. You build an internal library of behaviors and motives, so when the time comes to make a strategic decision, who to trust, who to keep close, who to distance, you're not guessing, you're recalling. People often mistake calm people for passive ones. But the truth is, we're just collecting receipts in silence, and that silence becomes your advantage in crisis. When everyone else panics, you think. When others yell, you calculate. You become the person people turn to when things fall apart. Not because you have all the answers, but because your stillness feels like a lifeline. Machiavellian calm isn't just psychological, it becomes social capital. You earn a kind of quiet authority built not on title or force, but on the reliability of your inner state. That's influence that can't be faked. But don't mistake that influence for invincibility. You'll still get tested, manipulated, provoked. The difference is you'll start seeing those tests for what they really are. Auditions. People are constantly auditioning for access to your time, your energy, your emotions. Most don't deserve it. Calmness gives you the clarity to filter them out, not with cruelty, but with indifference. You learn to conserve yourself, not because you're better, but because you're building something deeper, something that no one else can control. In the end, the Machiavellian philosophy of calm isn't about being emotionally distant. It's about becoming emotionally sovereign. You own yourself so completely that no one else can shake you unless you let them. Your reactions are your property. Your silence is your strategy. Your stillness is your sword. And once you've mastered that, really mastered it, people won't just notice. They'll feel it in their hesitation, in their confusion, in their quiet fear that no matter what they do, they can't seem to get under your skin because they can't. Not anymore. Machiavelli didn't need whips. He didn't need blades. He didn't need dark dungeons or racks or blood. He had something better, the human mind. Because he understood something that even the most brutal rulers never fully grasped. People will give you their secrets, not when they're in pain, but when they believe they're safe. And that illusion of safety, that's what Machiavelli weaponized. He knew that if you push someone hard enough, they'll lie. But if you pull them in just right, if you let them feel seen, validated, admired, they'll hand over everything, their fears, their loyalties, their motives, their deepest truths, all without you ever needing to raise your voice. These are the 7 psychological traps Machiavelli used to extract truth without a trace. And once you understand them, you'll see why the most dangerous man in the room is never the loudest. It's the one who listens quietly, patiently, and strategically. The first trap is the mirror of agreement. This trap is so subtle. Most people walk straight into it smiling. Machiavelli knew people love those who agree with them. Not because they value truth, but because agreement feels like validation. So when he wanted someone's thoughts, he never challenged them directly. He didn't press, he didn't correct, he simply mirrored. He'd say things like, "You're absolutely right, and I've always suspected that as well." Or, "That's exactly how I've been seeing it too." Or, "I thought I was the only one who noticed that." And suddenly the other person relaxes. Their ego opens, they stop defending and start revealing because they think they found an ally. But what they've really found is a trap. You agree with someone just enough to make them talk more, and the more they talk, the more they reveal. And once you have the information, you can act, pivot, manipulate, or destroy. Machiavelli's brilliance wasn't in argument, it was in extraction through flattery. And the trap works because the victim never even knows it was set. The second trap is the silence that squeezes. Interrogators fill the room with questions. Machiavelli, however, filled it with silence. He knew that when most people say something revealing, they instantly backpedal. They walk it back, reframe it, justify it. Unless you say nothing, the silence makes them anxious. They start wondering, did I go too far? So they keep talking, and in trying to fix their first slip up, they make 5 more. Silence creates pressure, but not the kind that makes people shut down. It's the kind that makes people spiral because they don't know what you're thinking. The power is not in the pause itself. It's in your stillness, your eye contact, your complete lack of response. You look at them like you already know the answer. and now they feel compelled to fill in the gaps. Use this with discipline. Speak less, watch more, and let the silence break them. The third trap is the distraction of storytelling. If you want someone to reveal their real values, don't ask them to explain their principles. Don't ask what they believe in. Ask them what they've been through. Machiavelli would often open up with small stories, low stakes, seemingly personal, often self-deprecating. There was a time I trusted the wrong man, or I remember when I was in a situation just like that. Or, I've made that mistake before and it cost me. It disarmed people. It made them feel like this was a moment of equal sharing. And once they believed that, they began to share too. And in those stories, unguarded, emotional, spontaneous, they revealed what no direct question ever could. Who they fear, who they admire, who they resent, who they blame, and most importantly, who they serve. Because stories are where truth hides, and most people, when offered the stage, will expose themselves entirely just to feel heard. Machiavelli wasn't just listening to the story, he was tracking patterns, watching expressions, reading word choices, dissecting allegiances, all while the other person thought they were bonding. The fourth trap is the decoy confession, one of the coldest in Machiavelli's arsenal. He would fake vulnerability to test the other's boundaries. He might confess a sin that isn't real, an indiscretion, a betrayal, a doubt, something small but provocative. Why? Because when you confess something dark, people feel safe revealing their own darkness. They match your energy, they say you too, and then they spill. But here's the twist. Your confession was a decoy. Theirs was real. And now you own the exchange. You've tricked them into thinking the conversation is balanced when in reality they've exposed something you haven't. And they don't realize it until much later, if ever. This tactic only works if you deliver it perfectly. Calm, subtle, quiet, not dramatic, not boastful. It must feel like a genuine slip of guarded truth. And once they take the bait, you've got leverage they can never take back. These first four traps don't rely on status. They don't require power. They don't even require intelligence. They require discipline. The discipline to speak less. The discipline to manipulate without threat. The discipline to sit still and watch people walk directly into your hands thinking they're safe. Because Machiavelli knew that torture breeds resistance, but comfort breeds confession. So he made people comfortable. He made them feel important. He made them feel heard, admired, and safe. And then he listened. And what they gave him was everything he needed to control them or destroy them without ever lifting a sword. The remaining traps are colder, sharper, and more dangerous. And they go deeper, not just into the mind, but into the soul. Because there's a level of psychological manipulation most people never reach. Not because they can't, but because they're afraid to. Machiavelli wasn't, and that's why he won. The most effective manipulation isn't force. It's seduction through understanding. Not sexual, not romantic, but psychological. The kind that makes people feel seen even as you unmake them from the inside. Machiavelli knew this. If you can wrap someone in comfort, respect, and curiosity, they will volunteer what others would die protecting. He didn't ask for information, he made people want to give it. That's what the next three traps do. These aren't tricks, they are weapons cloaked in warmth. Tactics so elegant the victim feels flattered while they're being dissected. Let's continue. The fifth trap is the scarcity of judgment. This is one of Machiavelli's most overlooked tactics. When you want the truth, the last thing you should do is judge it. The more neutral you remain, the more extreme people become. Because here's the secret. Most people aren't lying to hide things. They're lying because they expect you to disapprove of the truth. So, when Machiavelli wanted to know someone's real motives, he didn't confront them with suspicion. He did the opposite. He offered a space without consequences. He'd say, "That's understandable, I would have done the same." Or, "There's a logic to that kind of decision even if it's dark." Or, "We all make moves others wouldn't understand." To the average man, these words are just casual phrases. But to a manipulator, they're keys. Because when someone realizes you won't shame them, they open, they overshare, they confess sins just to test whether you'll recoil. And when you don't, they lean closer, they reveal more. They start peeling themselves open for you on their own. Machiavelli knew that judgment is a wall. Remove it and even kings will speak freely. The most dangerous part. They leave those conversations liking you more because you made them feel accepted in their darkest moments. What they don't realize is you weren't accepting them. You were extracting them. The sixth trap is curious misdirection. When someone suspects you're fishing for information, they go cold, they give short answers, they get defensive, they know what you're after and they won't give it. So Machiavelli distracted them. He'd ask questions about everything but the target subject. If he wanted to know someone's political loyalty, he'd ask about their opinions on others. If he wanted to know someone's ambitions, he'd ask about their friends' mistakes. If he wanted to know someone's plans, he'd ask about the flaws in someone else's strategy. Why? Because people drop their guard when the conversation isn't about them. Their ego detaches, their mouth moves faster. They speak truth disguised as commentary. They think they're sharing harmless opinions. Machiavelli is collecting data, calibrating values, tracking grudges, mapping out loyalties. And once he sees the pattern, he no longer needs to ask the real question, because the answer is already in the way they spoke about others. This trap is lethal because it never looks like a trap. The victim walks away thinking, what a deep, thoughtful conversation. But what they really had was a confession session disguised as analysis. They gave away everything without realizing they were even being studied. The seventh trap is the power of inverted admiration. Machiavelli understood the secret need of every human to be respected by the powerful. And this trap flips that impulse inside out. When someone believes you admire them, not just like them, but truly respect their mind, they will perform for you, they will try to impress you even more. And in that performance, they begin revealing far more than they should. But here's the twist. Machiavelli used inverted admiration. He would casually praise someone's intelligence or subtlety in a specific area, like the way you handled that disagreement. Only someone truly sharp would have seen that move. Or you remind me of someone I knew who was a master of strategy, ruthless but precise. Now the person thinks he sees me as a strategist, as a powerful mind, as dangerous. And what do powerful minds do when admired? They try to prove the image. They give more detail. They start showing their techniques. They offer examples. They volunteer truths they've kept hidden just to reinforce your impression of them. And all the while, they're exposing the very tactics Machiavelli wanted to uncover, because flattery doesn't just feel good. It becomes a mirror that people want to live up to. You tell someone you're very discreet and suddenly they're proving it. You say you're the type who keeps leverage and suddenly they're showing you how they do it. That's the genius of inverted admiration. You give someone a crown they didn't ask for, and they'll show you where they keep the kingdom just to prove they deserve it. By this point, the person sitting across from Machiavelli has no idea what's happened. They think they've been respected. They think they've been heard. They think they've been chosen. What they don't realize is that they've been dissected, their loyalties mapped, their weaknesses identified, their intentions revealed, their leverage handed over. And Machiavelli never raised his voice, never threatened, never begged. He just listened better than they expected and made them feel safer than they should have felt. That's the most terrifying part. When people are tortured, they know they've been broken. But when they're manipulated like this, they leave the room thinking it was their idea to share it all. They think they still have control. But the truth, they lost it the moment they felt understood. And that's when Machiavelli smiled. Because the most dangerous secrets are the ones you give willingly to someone who never asked directly, but always knew exactly what you needed to feel. And once you reveal those truths, there's no unraveling it. You've armed the quietest person in the room, and you'll never even realize it. By the time a person realizes what they've said, it's already too late. Because Machiavelli didn't just collect secrets, he converted them into leverage, into predictions, into weapons. You thought you were venting, you thought you were bonding, you thought you were admired, but you were being mapped piece by piece until your entire operating system was exposed. And now, even in silence, you could be controlled. That's the brilliance of Machiavelli's methods. He didn't extract secrets to possess them. He extracted them to build a blueprint of the soul, so that when the time came, he could bend your behavior without touching you. Let's break down how he used these secrets, how the traps weren't just for revelation but for control, and more importantly, how he ensured you'd never realize you were being played. Once Machiavelli knew what someone feared, loved, hated, or secretly desired, he wouldn't react. He'd log it. Because in Machiavellian strategy, reacting is for amateurs. Waiting is for rulers. So the man who revealed his fear of betrayal, Machiavelli wouldn't betray him. He'd just threaten isolation when the time was right. The woman who revealed she needed approval, he'd withhold praise not to hurt her, but to make her chase it. The ally who admitted he hated being underestimated, he'd subtly highlight his irrelevance in public just to force him to prove otherwise and thereby act exactly as Machiavelli needed him to. This is the core of psychological warfare. You don't use the secret once. You design a world where that secret controls the person forever. Each of these traps, admiration, silence, misdirection, had one more layer. They left the victim feeling seen. And that's the most effective illusion Machiavelli ever created. He made people feel that they weren't just understood but accepted. Why is that so dangerous? Because when someone feels seen and accepted, they stop hiding. And when they stop hiding, they start relying on your perspective, on your presence, on your approval. And now you are no longer just the man who knows their secrets, you are the man who understands them. And what do people do for those who understand them? They serve willingly, blindly, forever. Machiavelli didn't build followers. He built dependencies. Now comes the coldest move of all, the one that separates a manipulator from a master. You never use the secret immediately. Machiavelli would wait days, weeks, months, sometimes years because people forget what they've revealed. But Machiavellians never do. And when the moment was perfect, when the person was rising or at their most confident or at their most secure, that's when he'd deploy the truth they once whispered in confidence. Not as blackmail, not as a threat, as a reminder. You once told me something, and I've always respected that about you. Just enough to say I haven't forgotten. Just enough to inject a flicker of doubt. Just enough to make them realize he still has that. He still knows me. He still sees me. And now they behave. They comply. Not because of power, but because of history. That's the genius of delayed revelation. You don't need to punish, you just let the memory of your knowledge punish them on its own. Now let's flip the frame, because if Machiavelli used these tactics, so can others. So, how do you defend against psychological extraction? Not by becoming paranoid, but by mastering emotional discipline. Here's how. Never explain your decisions emotionally. People don't need to know why, only what. Let silence become your default response to curiosity. When people dig, go still. Let them feel the void. Be boring in storytelling. Share only what doesn't cost you leverage. Casual facts, no emotion, no confession. Watch your need to be admired. If someone flatters you, they're testing your pride. If you bite, they know how to lead you. Never confess to be relatable. It doesn't build connection, it builds vulnerability. And once you give that up, you've handed over the steering wheel. And finally, train yourself to be okay with being misunderstood. Because every time you rush to explain, clarify, or correct, you leak a need. And once someone sees your need, they don't need chains. They already own you. Machiavelli never tortured because he didn't have to. He extracted not by force, but by making the victim volunteer the blade, and hand it to him with gratitude, and the people he disarmed. They never suspected it because they left the conversation feeling admired, feeling seen, feeling special. But what they really were was decoded, reduced to data, stored like weapons to be used when needed, and only then. That's why the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one who speaks with authority. It's the one who asks calmly and listens fully. The one who sees you before you've even figured out who you are. The one who makes you feel safe while planting the exact trap that will one day decide your fate. The most devastating kind of power is the kind you never detect. It doesn't speak, it doesn't demand, it doesn't threaten, it listens, it calculates, and then when it moves, it's already too late. That was Machiavelli's genius. He didn't wait for weakness, he designed it, and he didn't torture people for their secrets. He turned them into willing participants in their own undoing. By the time they realized what had happened, he didn't need to control them. They were already controlling themselves for him. And now we arrive at the final and most chilling element of all. How Machiavelli used these secrets not only to extract and control, but to rewrite reality itself. After someone confesses something to you, a strange thing happens in their mind. They assume you now understand them. They imagine a bond, a closeness, a shared truth. They begin to believe that you're like them, or at the very least that you get them. Machiavelli knew this illusion was golden because the moment someone believes you understand them, they will begin to seek your opinion. They'll test your approval. They'll reference your past reactions. They'll behave in ways that align with the person you've seen them as, which means you can now do something terrifying. You can slowly reshape who they think they are. They told you they're ruthless. Subtly reinforce it. Of course you made that decision. You've always been 2 steps ahead. They admitted they hate being controlled. You say it's obvious. You've never been the type to follow blindly. And now they start playing the role you assigned to them. Not because you commanded, but because you heard it first and reflected it back like a mirror. But it wasn't a mirror. It was a blueprint. And by the time they're walking in it, the floor beneath their feet belongs to you. Once you know someone's secret, and you reflect it back to them strategically, you don't need to manipulate their external world. You manipulate the internal one. The cage no longer needs bars. They build it themselves. They limit their words around you. They calculate what they share. They anticipate your reactions. They crave your guidance or fear your silence. You have become their psychological frame, and the frame always controls the painting. This is what Machiavelli truly mastered. Not information, not manipulation, but architecting belief, crafting the unspoken rules by which others operate without ever appearing to have done anything at all. That is the highest level of control, and most people never realize it's even happening. You may think this is historical. That was Machiavelli's time. People are smarter now. Wrong. People are more talkative now, more reactive, more attention-starved, more emotionally impulsive, which means the psychological traps work even faster. Because today, everyone is broadcasting their inner world 24/7. The person who listens with discipline, who watches without rushing, who remains unreadable, has more power now than ever before because no one else is doing it. They're too busy talking. Let's crystallize everything into 7 laws. These are not tactics, they are principles. If you internalize them, you won't need to interrogate anyone ever again. The first law, make people feel safe, not interrogated. You don't pull information, you open space and let it walk to you. The second law, use flattery as a mirror, not a weapon. Don't praise them for what they want to be, praise them for what they're hiding. That's how you draw it out. The third law, speak less than you know but more than you reveal. Let your words suggest depth. Let your silence prove it. The fourth law, time is the sharpest blade. Don't use information too soon. The longer you wait, the more devastating its effect when revealed. The fifth law, confess strategically, offer small, fake, or outdated vulnerabilities. In exchange, people will offer fresh, real, and dangerous ones. The sixth law, weaponize neutrality. The less you react, the more people expose because they want to know what you think, and in that effort, they tell you everything. And the seventh law, make people perform their own role. Once you hear their truth, reflect it back subtly until they believe that's who they are. They will start acting accordingly, and you won't have to ask again. This is why Machiavelli's approach still haunts every negotiation, every power dynamic, every closed-door conversation, because people are desperate to be seen. And once they feel that you see them, they will open their chest and hand you the heart, and they'll do it smiling because they don't feel broken. They feel understood. But you're not there to understand. You're there to map, collect, and control. That's what separates the listener from the manipulator, the ally from the architect, the curious from the dangerous. So remember this. The most powerful secrets are never screamed. They're whispered, volunteered, laced with a smile, and handed over by someone who thought they were just being real. But the man who listened, he wasn't being real. He was being strategic. And by the time the truth was spoken, he'd already decided how to use it. Not today, not loudly, but quietly, precisely, perfectly, just as Machiavelli would. You ever notice how some people instantly decide you're the dumb one in the room? Maybe they don't say it out loud, but you can feel it. It's in the way they skim over your ideas, the way their eyes glaze when you speak, or the way they assume you won't notice the little moves they're making behind the scenes. And the funny thing is, most people react the exact same way when they sense this. They rush to prove themselves. They talk more. They explain harder. They push their intelligence like a salesman trying to hit quota. And that's exactly the moment they lose the game. Because if someone sees you as dumb, you've been handed one of the most powerful strategic advantages Machiavelli ever hinted at. The ability to move without being watched. The ability to act without being perceived as a threat. The ability to flip an entire power dynamic without ever raising your voice or announcing your intentions. Being underestimated is a weapon, but only if you know how to use it. Most people waste it. You won't. So, imagine this. Someone sizes you up and decides you're harmless, simple, easy to manage. Instead of proving them wrong immediately, what if you let that assumption sit there for a moment like bait? What if you held their perception gently in your hand and didn't crush it, but shaped it? Because here's the thing Machiavelli understood that almost everyone today overlooks. People don't fear what they think they control, and people don't control what they don't pay attention to. The second someone thinks you're not sharp enough to matter, you gain a kind of invisibility they can't defend against. But this invisibility only works if you play it deliberately. If you react emotionally to being underestimated, you waste the advantage. If you pretend to be oblivious, but your ego is screaming inside, you'll slip up. The real strategy starts with accepting that letting someone misjudge you isn't a humiliation. It's a setup. A slow one, a quiet one, but a devastating one if you execute it correctly. So what does that execution look like? It begins with restraint, not silence, not passivity. Restraint, the ability to hold back your full capability. Not constantly correct others and not reveal how much you're absorbing. Picture a conversation where someone is talking down to you. The natural instinct is to get louder, smarter, sharper. But the Machiavellian move is to stay curious on the surface and calculating underneath. Ask small questions that seem harmless, but actually uncover exactly what you need. Not at the right time. Let them believe they're guiding the interaction. People reveal more when they feel superior, especially to someone they think poses no threat. And in that environment, every assumption they make about you gives you leverage. When someone thinks you're incapable of noticing their manipulation, you get to observe their patterns in real time. When they think you're too naive to understand their motives, you get to map them out while they're distracted by their own arrogance. This is why holding your tongue now leads to punching 10 times harder later. You're not being passive, you're gathering ammunition. Now, here's where most interpretations of Machiavelli go shallow. They'll tell you to play dumb, but that's not the point. It's not about acting stupid. It's about creating strategic ambiguity. You're not broadcasting what you know or don't know. You're letting them fill in the blanks with their own assumptions. And those assumptions will always reveal more about them than about you. It's almost unfair how predictable people become when they think they're dealing with someone beneath them. For example, imagine someone in your workplace or social circle who treats you like you don't quite get how things work. Instead of proving you do, let them explain. Let them talk. Let them underestimate how closely you're listening. Let them believe you're a little slower on the uptake than you actually are. They'll slip up. They'll give away information they would never reveal to someone they saw as competition. They'll expose their vulnerabilities, their blind spots, and even the pressure points they're trying to hide. Machiavelli knew that the moment people feel superior, they also feel safe. And when people feel safe, they start making lazy moves. You want them making lazy moves. You want them comfortable. You want them underestimating what you're capable of, because that's when you gain room to maneuver. Power comes from room, from space, from the freedom to move while no one is looking at your hands. But here's where the real psychological twist begins. And this is something people rarely think about. When someone believes you're not intelligent, they actually project onto you what they think intelligence looks like. They reveal their own definition of smart, and that tells you exactly how to disarm them. If their idea of intelligence is quick thinking, slow down. If it's vocabulary, keep yours plain. If it's confidence, stay soft around the edges. You're not mimicking stupidity. You're avoiding triggering their threat radar. You're slipping under their expectations like water. And the moment you stop trying to impress anyone, something interesting happens. Your attention sharpens. You're no longer focused on yourself. You're focused entirely outward. You start catching micro-reactions. You start noticing what they avoid saying. You see insecurity hidden behind authority, jealousy behind criticism, desperation behind control. In this state, you're not the dumb one at all. You're the only one awake. And from that place, you can start shaping the dynamic in your favor. Not with force, not with confrontation, with subtle corrections that shift the balance of power without them ever realizing where the shift began. Maybe you start dropping small insights at moments where they least expect it. Not enough to scare them, just enough to reposition yourself in their mind. Maybe you start steering conversations under the guise of asking simple questions. Maybe you let them take credit for something that plants you in a better position long term. When someone thinks you're not calculating, they never suspect you're setting the table. But the real mastery, the part that separates people who dabble in strategy from people who live it, comes from understanding timing. Machiavelli stressed that revealing strength too early is as damaging as having none at all. You never show your hand while they still believe they have leverage over you. You reveal it only when the reveal changes something, when it tilts the board, when it forces a recalibration they can't backpedal from. This is why patience becomes your silent partner. When someone thinks you're dumb, you don't correct them immediately, because immediate correction satisfies your ego but ruins the trap. You wait. You let the misjudgment grow roots. You let them build an entire worldview around your supposed limitations. The deeper their belief, the harder the shock when the truth finally cuts through. And that shock is where power shifts permanently. Because once someone realizes they misjudged you that badly, they never fully trust their own perception again. From that moment on, they hesitate. And hesitation is oxygen for strategy. But before you even think about that final reveal, you need to master something even more difficult. The art of selective invisibility. The ability to blend into the background when necessary. To be present without being threatening. To let others fill the space while you quietly map the terrain. This isn't submissiveness. It's reconnaissance. You're gathering context. You're tracking alliances. You're identifying who listens and who only pretends to. You're cataloging the motivations that drive people's choices. Most people walk into a situation trying to be seen. They don't realize how much power there is in not being seen. Not fully, not clearly. When someone thinks they've figured you out, they stop looking deeper. When they stop looking deeper, that's when you can move the most freely. And the moment you understand how freeing that is, the moment you embrace being underestimated as a strategic shield rather than an insult, everything starts unfolding differently. Conversations feel different, interactions feel slower, easier to read. You stop taking things personally because you're too busy studying the board. The anger fades because you're no longer reacting. You're preparing. And that preparation, well, that's where things start getting interesting. Because once you know how to move under the radar, the next step is learning how to subtly influence the direction of the entire situation without anyone noticing the shift. And that is where the real transformation begins. The moment you start guiding things instead of defending yourself from them, the whole dynamic flips. And here's what makes it so powerful. The person who thought you were easy to manipulate will never suspect that the tiny adjustments you make are intentional. They'll explain them away as coincidences or their own decisions. That's exactly what you want. Think of influence here like adjusting the temperature of a room by a single degree. Too much and people notice. Too sudden and they question it. But a gradual shift, nobody says a word. Yet, everyone starts acting differently. That's the goal. You're not pushing people. You're nudging the environment. You're planting ideas without claiming them. You're making suggestions that seem harmless on the surface, but quietly strengthen your position underneath. A person who thinks you're dumb will often underestimate your suggestions the most. They'll wave them off as spontaneous thoughts instead of strategic moves. They'll listen without suspicion because they don't believe you're capable of steering anything. And they'll agree more often than expected because agreeing with someone you don't see as a threat feels like an easy choice. This is why subtle influence beats loud persuasion every single time. Persuasion triggers resistance. Subtle influence passes through unnoticed. But you can't influence anything effectively if you don't understand what the other person really wants. Not what they say they want, what they're actually chasing under the surface. People are walking stacks of desires. Validation, power, respect, security, admiration, control. Most of them don't even understand their own motivations clearly. But if you quietly watch long enough, without trying to show how smart you are, without inserting yourself into every moment, those motivations start shining through. Someone who craves control will try to manage every outcome. Someone who needs admiration will exaggerate their accomplishments. Someone who's insecure will overreact to tiny challenges. When you know the real desire behind someone's behavior, you don't have to outsmart them in every direction. You only have to speak to the one thing they're already driven by. It's like knowing where the current is in the water. You stop paddling against everything. You move with the flow that already exists. And here's the thing people really misunderstand about being underestimated. It gives you the perfect position to observe without pressure. When someone doesn't expect intelligence from you, they're not trying to hide their patterns. They reveal themselves freely. They reveal their rhythm, and every rhythm can be predicted. Once you can predict someone, influencing them becomes shockingly easy because now you're not guessing your timing. Machiavelli understood timing better than almost anyone. He knew that power isn't about dominating every moment. It's about inserting yourself at the exact moment when the smallest move has the maximum effect. The people who try to look brilliant all the time burn themselves out. The ones who wait for the right moment get the same results with a fraction of the effort. Being underestimated lets you wait without anyone breathing down your neck. They think you're irrelevant. They leave you alone. That's oxygen. Use it. And while you're waiting, you're doing something far more subtle. You're controlling where your competence leaks out. That's the secret. You don't hide everything. You hide enough. You let little hints of capability slip through only when they serve your larger plan. Not to brag, not to prove anything, but to redirect perception. A single unexpected insight, one well-timed solution, one moment where your clarity breaks through the fog just enough to recalibrate how they see you, but not enough to raise alarms. This is how you reshape someone's entire understanding of you without ever announcing the change. If you go from dumb to brilliant overnight, their ego will panic. They'll resist. They'll resent it. But if you go from dumb to not as dumb as I thought, they feel clever for noticing the improvement. Always let people believe they discovered the truth on their own. That belief softens their ego. And a softened ego is far easier to maneuver. There's another layer to this that most people miss, and it's one of the most devastating psychological advantages you can gain. The ability to become unpredictable. When everyone thinks they figured you out, all you have to do is shift slightly and suddenly you're impossible to pin down. People get uncomfortable when their assumptions stop working. They second-guess themselves, they hesitate. And remember, hesitation creates openings. So you create small inconsistencies, not chaotic ones, not dramatic ones, just enough to break their pattern of predicting you. You are calm one moment, then unexpectedly insightful the next. You let them teach you something simple, even though you already know it, then later offer a perspective they weren't expecting. This isn't manipulation for the sake of manipulation. It's a quiet reclaiming of power. It keeps you from being boxed in by their misjudgment. It makes them question the story they told themselves about you. And once they begin questioning that story, you step into the next phase of this strategy. Recalibration. Not a grand reveal, not a dramatic speech, but the gradual unveiling of the truth in a way that doesn't trigger their defenses. At first, they'll see your capability as an exception, then a coincidence, then a rare insight. Eventually, the pattern becomes undeniable, and they revisit their assumptions about you. That's when you gain real leverage, because at that point, you're not just proving yourself. You're rewriting the hierarchy. You're placing yourself in a position where your silence holds weight, where your words land heavier, where your presence shifts the tone of the room, and the people who once dismissed you find themselves unsure of how to address you. That uncertainty is a form of power. You didn't demand it. You earned it through patience, restraint, and precise timing. But here's the twist most people never realize. The goal isn't to make them see you as intelligent. The goal is to make their perception irrelevant. When you truly master this approach, what they think stops mattering because you control the angles of every interaction. You operate in a way where they can never fully predict you, never fully underestimate you again, and never fully place themselves above you without feeling that strange, quiet doubt. This is what happens when you stop trying to prove you're not dumb and start using their assumption as the foundation of your strategy. You stop reacting to their perception and start reshaping the environment itself. And once you reach that stage, Something interesting begins to unfold beneath the surface because now you're not just moving with subtlety. You're learning how to reposition yourself so naturally that people start following your lead without ever realizing what set it in motion. That subtle shift in direction, that hidden redistribution of influence, that is the moment where strategy becomes power and where outsmarting them becomes effortless. And the next step is learning how to apply that power in ways that don't just protect you but elevate you. Because once you understand how to move while underestimated, you're no longer just navigating the game. You're shaping it. And shaping the game requires something most people never train: the ability to stay 3 moves ahead without ever looking like you're planning anything at all. This is where the psychology deepens. When someone has already decided you're the least threatening person in the room, they unintentionally give you permission to move freely. They don't analyze your tone. They don't dissect your intentions. They don't consider your long-term plans because in their mind you don't have any. And that misconception becomes the perfect window to start placing small strategic markers in the environment. Tiny actions that seem insignificant on their own, but together form a map that leads exactly where you want to go. The key is subtlety. Grand gestures make people suspicious, especially if they've underestimated you, but small adjustments, those slip right under the radar. Maybe you position yourself closer to the sources of information. Maybe you build better relationships with people they overlook. Maybe you volunteer for a task that seems simple, but gives you access to the core of what's actually happening behind the scenes. They'll see these moves as harmless, but you're building leverage quietly, like someone placing stepping stones across a river that only they can see forming. And while you're placing those stones, something else is happening. Your understanding of the entire landscape becomes sharper than the people who thought they towered over you. When you're not busy defending your intelligence or proving your value, your mind stays clear. You see connections others miss because their ego blinds them. You notice shifts in tone. You pick up on alliances forming. You sense when someone is making a move out of fear rather than confidence. It's almost unfair how much information falls into your lap simply because you're not being monitored. Machiavelli understood this deeply. Power comes from information, not from looking powerful. The ones who look powerful are usually too busy performing strength to notice the quiet flow of influence underneath. You're living in that flow now. You're learning how to redirect it without force. That's the kind of influence that compounds. But here's where the strategy becomes dangerous in a good way. When you have information, when you've mapped the terrain, when you've built subtle influence, the temptation is to finally reveal everything you know, to demonstrate your intelligence, to reclaim your dignity by unleashing it all at once. And that's the trap. Because the moment you reveal too much, you become a threat again, and the entire advantage disappears. The real mastery is restraint at the peak of your strength. You don't reveal everything. You reveal only what is beneficial, only what strengthens your position further, only what nudges the environment in the direction you've chosen. Think of it as choosing where your light lands. Too much brightness blinds people and makes them defensive. A narrow, focused beam guides them without resistance. So instead of revealing your intelligence all at once, you let it appear in fragments. You let it surface only in moments that shape outcomes, never in moments that satisfy your ego. You let people continue believing they understand you, even though their mental picture of you is now years out of date. And the incredible part is that most people will cling to their outdated perception long after it stops being accurate, simply because updating it would require admitting they were wrong. This is part of why being underestimated can last so long. You're benefiting from their pride. As their view of you becomes increasingly misaligned with reality, that gap becomes your playground. You can act boldly where they expect timidness. You can ask precise questions where they expect confusion. You can take initiative where they expect passivity. And because they aren't prepared for you to be operating at this level, they won't block you. They won't sabotage you. They won't even recognize the openings they're giving you. They'll keep handing you advantages wrapped in condescension, thinking they're tossing you scraps, not realizing you're building an empire out of every overlooked moment.